Joining us now on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Congressman Dr. Rob Wittman, Republican, represents the 1st District of Virginia, which is kind of the northern neck area, Central Virginia, Fredericksburg. Congressman Dr. Wittman, great to have you with us, sir.
John, it's great to be with you this morning. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Now, John Brennan, the president, revokes his security clearance. I take the position that I don't know why any of these people that are no longer employed by the federal government need a security clearance, but give us your take on this whole thing.
Well, John, I think it does bring into context the larger question, and it's exactly what you point out. What is the need and what is the national interest being served by continuing security clearances for folks that are no longer serving in government? I think that's a bigger question. You know, we have over 1 million people with top secret security clearances, and as we learn and hear about breaches of security clearance requirements, and that is people revealing classified information, and not that Mr. Brennan has, but it's in a larger context of all the over 1 million people that have it. I think it does beg the question: the way that you manage classified information is to be very, very reserved in who you give a security clearance. And once somebody is out of the intelligence community, national security community, the question then becomes, is there a national interest and is there a need for this person to continue to have that security clearance? So it's not just unique to former Director Brennan, it's unique to anybody that is no longer in the government realm where there's a need for a security clearance. So I think we have to ask that question overall and really look at managing who gets a security clearance and who gets to continue that. You know, this has been really a matter of courtesy in the past. And I don't see that we need to continue to do that as a courtesy. I think you need to say, what's the national interest being served? What's critical for this person to have a security clearance after they leave government that is in the best interest of the nation? That's the compelling question that needs to be asked here. And we need to ask it across all different categories. And I hope that Congress takes this up, because I've been advocating for years that there are just too many security clearances out there, and it's almost impossible to manage because it takes so long for somebody to get a clearance that needs to be working in the areas, and we don't have good objective measures about who should really have a clearance. You know, it's like, well, a person who works in this area automatically has to apply for a clearance, and I just don't believe that's the case.
Well, there was one lawyer, I'd read this statement earlier, who said, well, you know, the problem with this is, you know, many of these people that have left the government with security clearances, you know, that's part of their job now. Like, it's a qualification. And, you know, for the layman, paying the freight, see, we as the taxpayer, we're paying this whole thing, right? So we say to ourselves, working people, Dr. Wittman, we say, okay, so let me get this straight, right? You need a security clearance out of the government to do your job? Well, what type of job's that? What type of a job would you have in the private sector that you can only be successful if you carry your security clearance with you? I mean, that there, that begs the question of why they have it. Go out and get a real job like I do, or like everybody else does. Just go get a job. So this idea that you get a security clearance and then you can sell it and market it as a consultant, as a lobbyist, as a defense contractor, lobbyist for government, whatever they do, hired by the big firms making a lot of money. For the average person looking at this, it's like, I don't get it, right? Serve the government, you leave the government. Why do you need a security clearance now?
Well, that's it, John. It goes to this basic question. Does a person that has left government service need that security clearance in the interest of the nation,
right?
Not in their self-interest, not for their own personal benefit? That ought to be the question. And if you're in a position where you're serving the national interest, then that ought to be the basis upon which your security clearance is continued or not. It shouldn't just be, well, yeah, we need to make sure we keep these people connected. You need to demonstrate a clear national interest, not a personal interest, not an interest for your own personal gain, in order to continue having a security clearance.
Well, that's just too much common sense, Dr. Wittman, right there. I mean, sorry. It's like, you know, when you say, why doesn't Congress stay in session until they pass a budget, which, like, you know, according to the founding fathers, is really the number one reason we're there, yet we never do one. That just makes too much sense. It makes too much sense, which means you can't do it in D.C., right? That's the problem.
Yes.
All right, let's get to President Erdogan and Turkey, as I know you're studying this very closely. So the Turkish lira declines 25% in a week. Now it's made a little bit of a comeback. And many in the Turkish media and government are complaining about President Trump's policies, doubling the tariff on both steel and aluminum. Basically, by doubling the steel tariff from 25 to 50% on Turkey, which is an ally, President Trump's, that amount of tariff, 50%, takes the Turkish government out of being able to compete by just selling steel to the U.S. It prices them out. They're the 8th largest steel supporter in the world, and the U.S. is a big customer of theirs. We represent 30% of their steel exports totally. So there's a lot of detail, but they're complaining, why did the president do this? And the president is saying, look, you've got an American citizen in a jail. He needs to come home. Let's get Pastor Andrew Brunson home, and then we can talk about a way to solve this. Then the Turks are saying, well, you're taking a domestic issue and turning it into an international financial straits against us. What is your position on this whole thing?
Well, I think the president is putting the necessary pressure on Turkey to get Pastor Andrew Brunson released. It's pretty straightforward. They have released him from prison, but they haven't released him from the country. And the reasons for them holding them are counter to, first of all, due process and legal fairness to Pastor Brunson, and secondly, it's been a clear request from the United States to do that. Secondly, John, is that if you see the behavior by both Erdogan and his government in the interests of NATO and the United States, Turkey is moving away from that. Turkey is trying to now associate itself more closely with Russia. And you know the new missile system that they're buying there, which is not compatible with the Patriot missile system, which, by the way, I went there and visited the batteries that we put in there to protect Turkey. And the things that it's doing with Syria, the things also that it's doing to, instead of pushing back against the terrorist and extremist groups in that area, you know, now are doing things to embrace them and at the very least, to be ambivalent towards them, not to fight back against these destabilizing forces in Syria. The efforts also by Iran to destabilize the area by supporting these terrorist groups like the Hezbollah in the area there. So those things are running counter to the interests of NATO, counter to the interest of the United States. Right. The United States has asked clearly the expectations of Turkey about what we need for them to do, and they have at every turn not only said no, but have moved in the opposite direction, moved away from U.S. interest. This is an effort to be able to get them to move in that interest. And one thing I want to point out, John, is that a lot of people have said, well, you know, the president is just jumping in and doing this. There's no reason for him to do this. Listen, we have pursued diplomatic means to resolve this, literally over the past year. Since the president's been in office, they have tried every measure diplomatically to get Turkey to act in the interest of NATO, which they are a partner of, to act against those terrorist groups, to release Pastor Andrew Brunson. And at every turn, they've moved away from that. It's not even that they've stayed static or stayed status quo. They've moved away from that. So, you know, the president has said, hey, listen, we're going to demonstrate to you that we are serious about this because those things have to be done in the interest of the United States, in the interest of NATO, and in the interest of the region. You know, security in the region is at interest here, too, because of things happening in Syria, with what Russia's doing in the area and what Iran is doing in the area.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're live today in Atlanta, Georgia. We're with Congressman Rob Wittman, 1st District, Virginia, Republican. He's also chairman of the subcommittee on sea power readiness in the United States. And he's traveled the globe and spent a lot of time traveling in the Middle East for a lot of different reasons, inspecting those Patriot missiles, one of the things that you mentioned. So critics say, okay, you're not treating your ally Turkey fairly, but the other side of the coin is, well, they're not treating us fairly too, and they've detained this pastor for this amount of time. And as you correctly pointed out, we've exhausted diplomatic channels, right? So it's not like this is the first salvo.
Yeah, no, we have gone to through every means possible, John, to give them opportunities to work with us to release Pastor Andrew Brunson, to work with us against what we believe are the forces in the area that work to destabilize. Now, listen, they're adamant about Kurdish extremist groups in the area. We understand that, but at the same time, they cannot move to closer ties to Russia. I mean, that's the purpose of NATO, is to make sure that we stand against regimes like Putin's in Russia, yet they are moving closer to Russia, moving closer to interest in the area that not only entertain but support terrorist and extremist groups in the area. So they continue to move away from the interest of NATO and the United States. If they're going to be a member of NATO, we have to engage them by every means possible to do the things that they need to do as a responsible member of NATO. And we have talked to them at length about that. And as I said, it's not as though they're just keeping at status quo, that they're not doing anything additional. They're doing even more things to move closer to Russia, even more things to support that instability in the region. That's not in our interest. It's not in our neighbors' interest. If they keep doing that, they leave us with very few means by which to change their behavior. And the president has said, hey, listen, we've tried all the diplomatic channels. Now we're going to do this to show that we are serious about what Turkey needs to do in order to help, not only in releasing Pastor Brunson, which is extraordinarily important, but also, what they're going to do to make sure they are a partner in stabilizing that region.
Well, I think you've really articulated this issue in a very succinct way. That is absolutely what we need to do. And this president is tough. I mean, he's standing up and he's like, we've tried everything, and now we're going to put economic pressure on you. And look, if you look at President Trump after 18 months, he is not shy about leveraging the international financial system in order to further his agenda or his America First agenda. He's done it repeatedly around the globe. We expect him to continue to do that. And, he takes this position, and it frames it for everybody, even in Turkey. He takes the position that everybody wants access to the American consumer. And so really why Turkey is upset now, not because they've had Pastor Andrew Brunson as a captive for so long and haven't done anything to work with us on it. The only reason they're upset now is because the U.S. is no longer able to buy their steel. And so they're deprived of hard cash. I mean, had it not been for that, this story wouldn't even be on the news. I mean, how long has Andrew been there? He's not at the top of anybody's mind. It's only now because they can't sell steel to the U.S. business community when the business community is expanding. So, look, at the end of the day, had the president not done this, absolutely nothing would have come of it anyway. All right, I want to get to this military parade. I'm really not in favor of this. I can't think, why would we be spending, I don't care if it's $15 million or $90 million on a military parade? What is the purpose of this?
Well, John, listen, I have no problem with celebrations of our military and of our veterans, and we do that all the time. I mean, we have celebrations where veterans and active duty military units march in parades. So what makes this one a little bit different is that it will be only, military units and veterans and so forth in the parade. I don't have a problem with doing those types of celebrations. The one thing that I think has to delineate this is the dollars that we need going towards our military must be towards generating readiness. So if you have a unit where it doesn't cost any additional time away from the critical mission that they need to do, or resources that would take away from their mission set, then I don't necessarily have a problem with it. Secretary Mattis came out and said, "Hey, listen, the estimation of the $92 million for a parade is inaccurate. What I would want, and what we've done on the Armed Services Committee, is to say, listen, a parade is okay as long as you're not taking resources away from critical missions, as long as you're not pulling units in from long distances away and taking away from their training time in order to do that. But to have a celebration of our military and for the nation to be able to honor them, I don't have a problem with that particular concept. I think that the key is in the details. Are we taking resources away from what would otherwise need to be used to build readiness in those units? Are we taking them away from critical mission sets? Are we putting in place additional costs where those dollars could be used elsewhere? And those are the questions that I think need to be asked as you design whatever type of celebration through a parade you do for active duty military and our veterans. And if you remember, too, what the Armed Services Committee passed is really a remembrance and right. honoring of the sacrifices that were made in World War I, because we're coming up on an anniversary of right. World War I. So we wanted to make sure that there was a theme to this and an opportunity for us to recognize and honor those sacrifices rather than just kind of a generic, let's have a parade. I think there needs to be a purpose behind it. So we on the Armed Services Committee tried to make it focused and say, it has to be mission and purpose driven, and it cannot take away from the critical elements of what the military needs to do in training, in developing readiness, in resources that can be used in other areas of rebuilding the military.
I think if I understand your position, it's whatever amount of money we spend on it, 12 million, 18 million, could that money be better spent on readiness, right? I think that's what the question everybody should be asking. And look, we're all for parades, but you've also got a $21 trillion debt with no end in sight. I've only got a minute. I know you're aware of this because of the committee chairman that you have. Military pilots say they've been attacked with laser beams 350 times in the last 6 months. Now, right now, they're laser beams. Tomorrow, they could be a weapon. Obviously, they're penetrating whatever the defense system is for these planes. I mean, you can't obviously go into anything that's confidential, but, I mean, is this a concern of anybody?
Well, John, yes, it is. It's a concern for our civilian pilots that also are experiencing these types of, laser incidents where they're being targeted with the laser. And again, it's interfering with their ability to pilot the aircraft, so it creates a risk and a danger there. But as you said, also, remember, lasers can be used as a targeting mechanism. So, you have laser-guided weaponry, and you would, we are very, very mindful of, where there might be weapons of that advanced type, and do a lot to figure out where, if any, there might be out there. But as you point out, it does create a risk for pilots. And when you see that, it does, as you point out, bring into question what other risks come along with that if somebody can target an aircraft with a laser beam. That's why it's so critical for us to make sure that we gather as much information as we can about what other potential threats that could bring down an aircraft might occur out there. And that is, does somebody have access or has somebody taken, a ground-to-air missile that could bring down an aircraft? We know a lot of organizations try to get those. So the question is, what is the threat that's out there? But there is an operational threat by somebody lasing a pilot, right. And what that does to their sight, because it can temporarily take away their sight, it can harm right. their eyesight, it can take away the ability for them to operate the aircraft. And as you right. know, they are precision aircraft that little anomalies there can cause a catastrophic failure with flight of the aircraft. So those are all things that are deeply of concern to us. And many times, they're outside of areas where you could put in some security around an airport. What you see with commercial pilots a lot of times is, with their experiences, people that are outside the boundaries of the fence line of an airport that all of a sudden are lasing them as they're coming in or leaving the airport. And the same with military pilots. And many times it's outside of their areas too on routine patrol. I mean, if you're standing on a beach in the coast of Virginia or North Carolina, there's a high likelihood that you're going to see an F-18 aircraft leaving Oceana Naval Air Station going to the bombing range in Dare County. And many times they're flying at a low altitude at a cruising speed, which does bring into bear somebody using, a low-powered laser, one that you can buy off the shelf, to shine at the pilot. So those are things that all of us are concerned about, and the increased frequency of them does lend itself to, I think, some greater consideration about what we can do to counter that.
Absolutely. There's never a question that I can ask Congressman Wittman that he doesn't have an immediate answer for. I don't know how you keep up with all this stuff. But look, this is an issue we have to deal with. We're out of time, but now I'm going to ask you a question that it's going to be very difficult for you to answer. Not that I'm trying to stump you, but I just got to get one in. Okay, 2018 season, how many games did the Washington Redskins win?
Redskins win 9 games this season.
Rob Wittman says they win 9 games. Could or could not get them in the playoffs. 9 games always on the bubble, but doubtful.
Yes.
Right on the bubble. Congressman Rob Wittman, thanks for being with us, sir. Follow him, wittman.house.gov, John Fredericks Radio Network.